Okay, sorry, that last one went a little too long, so I'm going to make it into a separate video. Okay, so your separate video is going to be really short, about 4 minutes, just talking about the subfields of psychology, the research part and the applied part. So here's what we're actually talking about currently. If you want to major in psychology, if you want to be a psychologist, what does that look like? It looks very different depending on what type of subfield you'd like to go into. So subfield coming off of it. Research or applied. All right, so let's talk about research first. So the research part of psychology, you have a couple different things you can be. So psychologist, we've talked about these subfields already. So you can be a biological researcher, you can be a developmental, cognitive thinking, personality, or social researcher. So what he or she would do if you were that type of psychologist. Biological, you're looking at the links between the brain and the mind. Talked about that already. So the things that happen in your brain, and your mind, and so what physically happens, like neurotransmitters being released, and what that looks like as feelings. Developmental, this is a huge part of research, looking at how children develop. If you are a parent, you read things all the time about development. What's normal, what's not normal, how to help with different behaviors, how to make sure your child thrives in their environment. Cognitive, looking at perception, thinking, solving problems. So a lot of the things that we learned about as teachers is comes from cognitive psychology research. So looking at how people or children learn, how they solve problems, and to help them through that. Personality, looking at different types of traits that people have and researching that. And then social psychology research fields, that would be looking at how we affect one another as people, putting people in different situations and looking at how they react. Here is, change it so you can see it. Here is a pie chart that shows all the different fields of psychology and what most researchers do. All right, so you're looking at, as a whole, people that are in the subfield of research. Most of them are developmental psychologists. We talked about that. So looking at people, how people develop. But you also have this huge kind of portion here. Let me move it up a little bit. Looking at social. All right, so people that are in certain situations, how they react. And then you can see the other ones that, like, personality is a really small one. We didn't even look at psychometrics. Very small part of psychology for the research. All right, the other part, which you are probably more familiar with, the applied psychology. So now you're looking at people that you think of psychologists kind of traditionally, the clinical psychologist, your counselor, an educational psychologist, and an industrial or psychologist. We'll talk about that one last. So clinical, looking at people with psychological disorders and treating them. Counseling, this is like the counselor that we have at school. Looking at, or I'm sorry, not at schools, that would be our educational. Counselor, looking at like a marriage counselor, going to see someone and talk about things happening in your marriage, academic problems you might have. So our counselor here does help with that. Vocational, so you're having trouble with your job, you might go to just a normal counselor. So an educational counselor is a little bit different, not so much someone who's at a school, but they're looking at individuals that are in school and looking at their educational settings and seeing whether or not that's influencing how they learn. And then the industrial organizational psychologist is actually a really cool one. These are people that actually go into workplaces and study workplaces and then give advice to big corporations on how to make their employees more productive. So Google has hired organizational psychologists, and they find all these interesting things that make people more productive. So if they're allowed to wear slippers during the day, if there's a lot of plants around, if there's calming music, people are more comfortable and will be more productive. So if you're a boss and you want to make your co-workers or your people more productive during the day so you're not losing money, you might hire a industrial psychologist to help you out with that. So here's another pie chart. This is off. On what most people do if they are a psychologist in those applied subfields. So the majority, we're looking at almost 70% are clinical psychologists. So that's your kind of common understanding of a psychologist, where you You sit down and you talk to them about things going on in your life. Educational, industrial, and the other, those make up really small percentages. But I think that industrial psychology is a new type of psychology you'll actually see a little bit more of, especially, again, in big corporations like Microsoft and Google and Walmart, where they want people to be happy and productive and actually save money by hiring someone else to see how people would be happy. All right, last slide, but a big thing you have to know. The difference between being a clinical psychologist and a psychiatrist. Okay, so clinical, spelled wrong here. Let me change that. Clinical psychologist versus a psychiatrist. So a clinical psychologist has a PhD. PhD meaning they have a doctorate in philosophy. That's what PhD stands for. This is talking about more of the applied, so they're assessing people, they're treating people with psychotherapy, so talking through things. Versus a psychiatrist. So a psychiatrist actually goes through medical school. They're an MD, a medical doctor. These people can prescribe drugs for psychological problems. Okay, so if you have anxiety, you might actually have a combination, someone who's a psychiatrist and you'd have a psychologist. So you'd go to the psychiatrist to get your anti-anxiety medicine, all right? So you're talking about things that are biologically wrong with your body, and that's how you get that part of your treatment. You'd also probably talk to a clinical psychologist talking about ways to cope with your anxiety, people that make you anxious and how to get rid of those anxious feelings. So you're actually doing a combination of both. Talk about this more, but most current studies say that you need both in order to cure things or to get through things like anxiety, that it's not one or the other. You can't just take anti-anxiety and you can't just go to therapy. You actually have to have a combination of both in order to be productive or get through that type of disorder. So that's the end of your applied versus research psychology. We'll talk more about these things throughout the year.